No civilization ever collapsed because it ran out of rules. They collapsed because the rules tried to stop the flow. Water does not argue. It does not negotiate. It does not need permission. It moves. It finds the lowest resistance, the smallest crack, the forgotten edge. When blocked, it pools. When constrained, it pressures. When ignored, it floods. And when given space, it sustains everything it touches. Money behaves the same way. For most of human history, value moved freely through trade, trust, and shared survival. Grain became currency. Salt became power. Gold became memory, not because someone declared it so, but because people agreed it worked. Flow created legitimacy, not authority. Then came the dams, borders, banks, ledgers, titles, permissions, intermediaries. Structures built not to help water move, but to decide who controls the valve. At first, dams feel safe. They promise stability, predictability, protection from chaos. They convince people that stillness is strength, but still water rots. Every system that prioritizes control over circulation eventually poisons itself. The signs are always the same: stagnation, inequality, pressure buildup, and sudden collapse that no one claims responsibility for. This is not ideology, it is physics. The mistake we keep repeating humans: mistake ownership for authority. We draw lines on maps and call them borders. We stamp paper and call it money. We write rules and call them law. But none of those things move value. People do. Time does, energy does, flow does. The moment a system forgets that its purpose is to facilitate movement, it becomes a mechanism of friction. And friction, when monetized, becomes power. Fees, delays, gatekeeping, complexity disguised as safety. The modern financial world did not become broken overnight. It became over-engineered, layer upon layer of abstraction, until the average person no longer understands what they own, where it is, or who truly controls it. When people lose visibility, they lose agency. When they lose agency, they accept dependency. When dependency becomes normalized, control no longer needs force. It only needs silence. Why water terrifies power. Water cannot be centralized forever. You can dam a river, but only temporarily. You can redirect it, but never permanently. You can tax it, but only where it surfaces. Every empire that attempted total control over flow eventually learned the same lesson. Pressure always finds release. This is why decentralized systems are not new. They are ancient. Trade routes, merchant networks, informal economies, black markets, barter systems, underground exchanges. Whenever authority overreaches, water goes underground. The mistake modern systems made was believing digitization meant domination, that converting value into numbers meant it could be frozen, reversed, or confiscated without consequence. But water doesn't care about formats. It cares about access. Flow is not freedom, it is reality. This book is not about rebellion. It is not about overthrowing institutions. It is not about replacing one ideology with another. It is about seeing clearly. Money is not moral. Systems are not evil. Power is not inherently corrupt. But anything that blocks flow without accountability will eventually collapse under its own weight. The question is not whether change is coming. The question is whether you will recognize it as flow or mistake it for chaos. A different way to look at money. What if money was not something to hoard but something to circulate? What if value was measured not by accumulation but by optionality? What if security came not from walls but from mobility? Water does not ask for loyalty. It rewards adaptability. Those who learn to move with it survive droughts, floods, and storms. Those who try to command it are eventually erased by it. This is the law of water, not a manifesto. Every dam begins with good intentions. No one sets out to stop a river out of malice. They do it to survive, to protect crops, to prevent floods, to bring order to chaos. Early dams were not tools of domination. They were tools of coordination. At first, the problem is not that humans centralize value. The problem is why they keep doing it, even after it stops serving them. Fear is the first architect. Before there were banks, there was scarcity. Before scarcity, there was memory. Humans remember droughts, famines, winters that never seem to end. Entire generations shaped by what happened when the flow stopped. That memory became instinct, and instinct became policy. Store it, guard it, control it. Centralization feels like safety because it promises predictability. A reservoir instead of a gamble. A vault instead of trust. A ledger instead of memory. When value is centralized, people believe chaos can be negotiated with rules. But fear does not design resilient systems. It designs rigid ones. And rigidity does not survive pressure, from coordination to control. At small scales, centralization works. A village granary prevents starvation. A shared treasury funds defense. A common currency simplifies trade. These systems succeed because the distance between decision and consequence is short. The stewards are visible. Abuse is difficult to hide, but scale changes everything. As populations grow, so does abstraction. Authority moves farther from reality. Decisions are made by people who never touch the water, only the dials that claim to control it. What began as coordination quietly becomes control. Rules stop serving flow and start serving hierarchy. Access becomes permission, permission becomes leverage, and leverage becomes power. Why power always centralizes power does not trust movement. Flow threatens predictability. Predictability threatens authority. The more centralized a system becomes, the more it fears anything it cannot fully see or command. This is why institutions crave transparency from individuals, but resist transparency themselves. It is not hypocrisy. It is survival instinct. A dam builder believes that if they release too much water, everything downstream will unravel. They convince themselves that restriction equals responsibility. But water does not disappear when it is blocked. It accumulates. The illusion of stability, centralized systems sell stability by slowing everything down. Processing times, settlement delays, approval layers, compliance checks. Each layer is framed as protection. In reality, it is friction, monetized friction. Friction creates revenue. Revenue funds authority. Authority justifies more friction. This loop becomes self-reinforcing until the system forgets its original purpose entirely. At that point, the dam no longer exists to manage water. It exists to justify itself. Still, water looks calm on the surface. Underneath, pressure builds. Why people accept the dams? Most people do not support centralized systems because they love control. They support them because they fear uncertainty more than dependence. Predictable loss feels safer than unpredictable freedom. A guaranteed paycheck, even if shrinking, feels safer than variable opportunity. A controlled system, even if unfair, feels safer than navigating flow alone. Dams exploit this psychology. They promise protection from floods while quietly charging rent for access to water. And as long as the water trickles, most people never question the structure upstream. When dams do not fail gradually. They fail catastrophically. Cracks are ignored because the surface looks calm. Warnings are dismissed because the system has worked before. Those in control delay action because releasing pressure threatens their authority. Then one day the flow decides for them. History is full of these moments. Currency collapses, banks freeze withdrawals, markets halt trading, trust evaporates overnight. People call these events crises. They are not. They are corrections. The pattern that never changes. Centralize, stabilize, extract, stagnate, collapse, reset. Every civilization repeats this cycle because the impulse to control flow is older than reason. Humans fear water when they forget how to move with it. This book is not about blaming the dam builders. They are not villains. They are responding to the same fear every generation inherits. But fear cannot be allowed to architect the future forever. The question that matters. The question is not whether dams will exist. They always will. The question is whether you understand when you are living upstream, downstream, or trapped behind one. Because once you recognize the structure, you can decide how much dependence you are willing to accept and how much flow you want back in your life. The water's already moving. The only question is whether you are watching it or standing in its way. Fees, delays, permissions. Power rarely announces itself as force. It presents itself as process. Friction is the most effective form of control ever invented because it doesn't feel like oppression. It feels reasonable. It feels administrative. It feels necessary. A small delay, a modest fee, one more form, one more approval. Individually, none of these feel threatening. Together, they define the boundary between freedom and dependence. Friction is resistance introduced into flow. In physics, friction converts movement into heat, energy lost to the system. In financial systems, friction converts movement into revenue and authority. Every time value changes hands and something skims the surface, friction is at work. Transaction fees, processing delays, minimum balances, withdrawal limits, approval requirements, settlement windows. These are not accidents. They are design choices. Friction slows movement just enough to be monitored, measured, and monetized. Force creates resistance. Friction creates compliance. When people are blocked outright, they push back. When they are slowed slightly, they adapt. They internalize the rules. They plan around the delays. They stop questioning the cost. Over time, friction becomes invisible. A system that openly restricts movement must constantly justify itself. A system that merely inconveniences movement trains people to self-regulate. That is far more efficient. Permission is friction disguised as protection, approved, pending, under review. These words sound neutral, even reassuring. But permission is simply delayed access granted at someone else's discretion. The longer permission takes, the more power the gatekeeper holds. When permission becomes normal, ownership becomes symbolic. You may own value, but only within boundaries defined for you. Time is the most underestimated cost. A delay is not just waiting, it is lost optionality. While value is frozen, opportunities pass. Needs change. Risk accumulates. Those who control settlement time control exposure, and delays are rarely symmetrical. Large players move quickly. Smaller participants wait. Speed becomes privilege. Fees are often justified as maintenance, as security, as oversight. Sometimes that's true, but fees also shape behavior. High fees discourage movement. Layered fees discourage experimentation. Unclear fees discourage transparency. Over time, people stop asking why the cost exists and focus only on whether they can afford it. When cost replaces understanding, control is complete. Most systems claim to offer choice. You can move your money within limits. You can access your value during approved hours. You can exit in after penalties. This is not freedom. It is managed movement. When every option carries cost, delay, or permission, people choose the path of least resistance. That isn't laziness. It's rational adaptation to constraint. Technology should reduce friction. And yet, in many systems, friction increases as tools improve. Because friction is no longer a limitation. It is a business model. When systems profit from resistance, efficiency becomes a threat. Speed undermines control. Transparency undermines leverage. Direct access undermines intermediaries. So friction is preserved and rebranded as safety. The shift happens when you ask one question: who benefits from this delay, this fee, this permission? If the answer is never you, then friction is not serving you. It is shaping you. Friction trains obedience without commands. It enforces hierarchy without force. It extracts value without confrontation. Flow threatens friction. When value moves directly, there is no surface to skim, no delay to monetize, no permission to withhold. This is why systems built on friction resist change so aggressively. It isn't ideology, it's survival. You do not need to eliminate friction entirely. Even water needs banks to form a river. But when friction exists primarily to extract rather than protect, it becomes control. Understanding this doesn't require rebellion. It requires awareness. Once you recognize friction for what it is, you can decide when it's worth paying and when it's simply another dam pretending to be a bridge. And water, given the chance, always finds another route. Wealth is often mistaken for security. Liquidity is mistaken for convenience. In reality, liquidity is freedom. It is not how much value you possess that determines your agency. It is how quickly, easily, and reliably you can access it when reality changes. A fortune locked behind barriers is not power. It is potential held hostage. Ownership is a concept. Access is a condition. You can own property you cannot sell. You can hold funds you cannot withdraw. You can have credit you cannot use. In moments of stability, this distinction feels irrelevant. During disruption, it becomes everything. Liquidity is the ability to move when conditions shift. It is optionality in real time. Without it, wealth becomes static, impressive on paper, ineffective in practice. Illiquid participants are predictable. They cannot exit quickly. They cannot reposition easily. They cannot apply pressure by leaving. Liquidity empowers choice, and choice undermines control. This is why many systems reward accumulation while quietly restricting access. They encourage long-term holding while penalizing mobility. The message is subtle but clear. Stay where you are. Long-term planning is framed as responsibility. Lockups are framed as discipline. Delayed access is framed as maturity. But every lock trades flexibility for certainty, and certainty is fragile. The future never arrives in the form you plan for. It arrives as disruption. Opportunity does not wait for approval windows or settlement periods. Those who can move survive change. Those who cannot are forced to endure it. Liquidity is not just about money. It is about time. Access to value determines how quickly you can respond to risk, to opportunity, to necessity. When value is illiquid, time works against you. Delays compound stress. Options narrow. Those with liquidity operate in the present. Those without it are trapped in the past. History is filled with moments where wealthy individuals were powerless, not because they lacked value, but because their value was inaccessible. Assets frozen, accounts paused, promises deferred. Paper wealth disappears when systems stop. Real-world obligations do not. Food, shelter, mobility, safety. These demand immediate access, not future assurances. Liquidity bridges intention and action. Optionality is the real asset. Optionality is the ability to choose among outcomes. Liquidity creates optionality by reducing dependence on any single system, institution, or timeline. The more liquid your value, the fewer permissions you need. This does not mean constant movement. It means the ability to move. Still water becomes vulnerable. Flow creates resilience. Accumulation is visible. Liquidity is not. Balances, net worth statements, and milestones reward accumulation psychology. Liquidity is quiet. It does not signal status. It does not impress observers. But systems reward appearances. As long as success is measured by size rather than access, control remains intact. Illiquidity feels harmless until it becomes urgent. Penalties, waiting periods, restrictions, forced conversions. Each extracts value at the moment you need it most. Illiquidity is expensive precisely when you cannot afford it. Liquidity is often mischaracterized as impatience or lack of discipline. In reality, it is strategic humility, the recognition that no model survives contact with reality. You cannot predict every shock, but you can prepare to respond to them. Liquidity is preparedness without prediction. When conditions change, freedom is measured in seconds, not balances. Can you move today? Can you adapt now? Can you choose without asking? If not, your wealth is conditional. Liquidity removes conditions. Wealth is the accumulation of value. Liquidity is access to it. One impresses systems, the other protects individuals. In a world defined by accelerating change, freedom belongs not to those who have the most, but to those who can move when it matters. Water does not cling to form. It flows where it is needed. And those who understand this do not chase wealth blindly. They design for access, because when everything shifts, liquidity is not a luxury, it is survival. Stability is one of the most comforting ideas ever sold. It promises safety, predictability, continuity. But stability, when misunderstood, becomes stagnation. Still water looks calm. It reflects the sky. It appears peaceful. And beneath the surface, it decays. Uncertainty exhausts the nervous system. Humans evolved to survive immediate threats, not prolonged ambiguity. Stability offers relief from constant decision-making. It allows people to plan, to rest, to believe tomorrow will resemble today. Systems learn this early. If you promise stability, people will trade adaptability for comfort. They will accept limitations as long as outcomes feel familiar. Stability reduces resistance more effectively than force. But what feels stable is often just unchallenged. Stability resists change. Resilience absorbs it. A stable structure works until conditions shift. A resilient one expects change as a constant. Water does not try to remain still. It moves to remain intact. Systems that prioritize stability freeze themselves in time. They optimize for yesterday's conditions and treat deviation as risk instead of reality. This is how rot begins. Movement cleans. Circulation refreshes. Flow prevents buildup. When systems stop moving, problems do not disappear. They accumulate. Inefficiencies stack. Inequities deepen. Complexity increases. Trust erodes. The surface remains calm because pressure is distributed slowly. By the time disruption becomes visible, decay is already systemic. Rot is not loud. It is patient. Stability is not just a condition. It is a narrative. Too big to fail. Safe and sound. Protected by regulation. These phrases are designed to quiet doubt. They frame movement as danger and preservation as virtue. People are taught that change is reckless and questioning is irresponsible. But no living system survives by remaining unchanged. When stability becomes sacred, adaptation becomes heresy. Rot begins where inspection is rare. Outdated assumptions, unexamined incentives, deferred maintenance, unchallenged authority. Because nothing appears broken, nothing is fixed. The system continues to function, barely, and that functioning becomes proof of health until it doesn't. Collapse rarely comes from sudden shocks alone. It comes from years of ignored decay finally meeting pressure. Still, systems reward compliance. If you do not move, you are safe. If you do not question, you belong. If you do not adapt, you are predictable. Over time, people internalize this logic. They stop preparing for change and start defending the system itself. That is the final stage of rot. When a system has been still for too long, any movement feels extreme. Even small shifts trigger fear. Even minor disruptions are framed as existential threats. This is not because change is dangerous, but because the system has lost its ability to absorb it. Water that has not flowed becomes fragile. No system escapes change. Stability only postpones it. The longer movement is delayed, the more violent the eventual correction becomes. Pressure that is not released accumulates energy. When release finally comes, it is interpreted as chaos rather than consequence. People blame the storm. They forget the stagnation. Flow is not instability, it is continuous adjustment. Small movements prevent catastrophic shifts. Ongoing circulation keeps systems clean, responsive, and honest. Flow exposes weaknesses early when they can still be addressed. This is why dynamic systems appear messy. They are alive. True stability is not stillness. It is the ability to change without breaking, movement without collapse, adaptation without fear, flow without loss of identity. Water does not rot because it moves. It survives because it refuses to stay still. If a system tells you it cannot change, it is already dying. If it tells you movement is dangerous, it is protecting decay. And if it promises stability above all else, it is asking you to ignore the smell. Still water rots, flow endures, and the difference between the two is not time. Most revolutions are loud. This one is quiet. It does not arrive with banners or slogans. It arrives as infrastructure, subtle changes in how value moves, who controls access, and how trust is established. Web 3 is not a rebellion against the system. It is a reconfiguration of flow, and that distinction matters. Web 3 is often misunderstood. It is not a promise of instant freedom. It is not a guarantee of wealth. It is not immune to failure, greed, or error. It does not eliminate institutions. It does not remove risk. It does not fix human behavior. Anyone presenting it as salvation is repeating the same mistake every generation makes, confusing tools with outcomes. What Web3 actually changes is where friction lives. In traditional systems, friction is imposed by intermediaries. In digital networks, friction is pushed into code, explicit, inspectable, and often optional. This is the core shift. Instead of trusting institutions to behave correctly, accepting delays you cannot audit, or paying fees you cannot verify, you interact with systems where rules are visible, settlement is deterministic, and access is permissionless by default. This does not make systems fair. It makes them legible. Gatekeepers control flow by discretion. Protocols control flow by rules. That difference is everything. A protocol does not care who you are. It does not ask for status, context, or justification. If conditions are met, the transaction happens. If they are not, it doesn't. There is no mood, no exception, no favor. This removes a specific kind of power, the power to decide after the rules have already been written. Many people focus on speed as the advantage of digital systems. That misses the point. Speed matters only because it reduces exposure. When settlement is immediate, uncertainty collapses. When ownership is final, leverage disappears. When access is direct, dependency weakens. The real advantage is not speed, it is finality. Finality restores agency. Self-custody is often framed as a lifestyle choice, a technical burden, or an ideological stance. It is none of those. It is a structural shift in where control resides. When you hold value directly, permission disappears. When permission disappears, friction loses leverage. When leverage disappears, power decentralizes, not evenly, but irreversibly. This does not mean everyone should self-custody everything. It means the option now exists, and optionality changes behavior upstream. Digital rivers bypass toll booths. They do not eliminate institutions, but they force them to compete. Fees must be justified. Delays must be explained. Restrictions must be defended. This is uncomfortable for systems built on opacity. Transparency removes narrative control. Determinism removes discretion. When people can see how value moves, they begin to ask better questions. Trust does not disappear in digital systems, it relocates. Instead of trusting people, you trust code. Instead of trusting promises, you trust execution. Instead of trusting authority, you trust verifiability. This is not inherently better. Code can fail, protocols can be misdesigned, but failure becomes observable rather than obscured. Visibility replaces faith. Flow always feels chaotic to those accustomed to stillness. When barriers fall, movement increases. When movement increases, volatility follows. This is not instability, it is repricing. Systems adjusting to real-time information appear noisy at first. Over time, they become efficient. Water is loud when it breaks through a dam. It is quiet once it finds its path. Web3 does not give people more money. It gives them more exits, more ways to move, more ways to opt out, more ways to route around friction. That alone is enough to change incentives across the entire landscape. Power adapts when exits exist. Digital rivers are still forming. Channels are shallow. Currents are uneven. Floods happen. This is expected. Early infrastructure is always unstable. But once value learns how to move without permission, it does not forget. The question is not whether digital rivers will replace everything. They won't. The question is whether you recognize when value is flowing around you and whether you are positioned to move with it, instead of defending structures that require stillness to survive. Web3 is not the destination. It is the moment water finds a new path. And once it does, the landscape is never the same. Custody is not ownership. Custody is permission to access ownership. For most of modern history, people have not held value directly. They have held claims, records maintained by institutions that promise access under specific conditions. And as long as the system functions, that distinction feels academic, until it doesn't. Self-custody removes the final intermediary between you and your value. No approvals, no schedules, no exceptions. The flow responds directly to the holder. This is not ideology, it's architecture. Intermediaries were not created to steal. They were created to simplify. Managing value is complex. Storage, security, accounting, recovery. These are real problems, and intermediaries solve them at scale. For a time, the trade-off made sense. But every intermediary introduces dependency, and dependency concentrates risk. When access is mediated, control becomes conditional. And when control is conditional, ownership becomes fragile. The most profound change self-custody introduces is not technical, it's psychological. When no one can reverse your transaction, you think differently. When no one can freeze your access, you plan differently. When no one can intervene for your protection, you assess risk honestly. Self-custody does not make you safer. It makes you aware. And awareness changes behavior more effectively than rules ever could. Responsibility feels dangerous because modern systems have trained people to outsource it. If something goes wrong, someone else should fix it. If access fails, someone else should explain it. If value disappears, someone else should be blamed. Self-custody removes that safety net, but it also removes silent failure modes, account freezes, delayed withdrawals, policy changes disguised as upgrades. Risk becomes explicit instead of hidden. Reversibility is comforting. It's also control. A system that can undo your actions can override your intent. A system that can protect you can restrict you. There is no neutral power of reversal. Self-custody accepts irreversibility as the price of autonomy. Water that can always be redirected never truly flows. Not everyone needs full control at all times. That is not the point. The point is choice. When self-custody exists as an option, intermediaries must compete. Custodial systems must earn trust instead of inheriting it. Fees must justify themselves. Restrictions must explain themselves. Optionality disciplines power. There is no system without risk. Centralized systems fail quietly until they don't. Self-custodied systems fail visibly and immediately. One hides fragility, the other exposes it. Neither eliminates danger. One simply removes the illusion that someone else is responsible for your survival. Ownership is not a checkbox. It is an ongoing relationship with value. Self-custody forces engagement. It demands attention. It requires learning. That is why it feels uncomfortable. It resists passivity, and passivity is expensive. Self-custody collapses distance. You are no longer downstream from policy decisions. You are no longer waiting on process. You are no longer negotiating access to what you already own. The flow responds to you directly. That is not empowerment rhetoric. That is structural reality. Self-custody trades convenience for sovereignty, not absolute sovereignty. Nothing offers that, but meaningful agency. The ability to act without permission, the ability to move when conditions demand it. This is not a call for purity. It is a call for awareness of where control resides. Because once you experience ownership without intermediaries, you understand something systems prefer you never notice. Control is not taken, it is delegated. And delegation, once made optional, is never permanent. Self-custody is not the end of the river. It is the point where the water remembers it can move on it. Ideologies demand loyalty. Philosophies demand awareness. The difference is subtle, but everything depends on it. Ideology hardens. Water does not. Ideologies promise certainty. They draw lines, define enemies, offer identity in exchange for obedience. They tell people what to think instead of teaching them how to observe. This is why every ideology eventually fails. The world changes. Reality shifts. Conditions evolve. And ideology, unable to bend, fractures. Water survives because it refuses to become rigid. To move like water is not to reject structure. It is to refuse attachment to it. You do not defend systems. You evaluate them. You do not pledge allegiance to tools. You assess their usefulness. You do not confuse identity with strategy. Belief locks you into positions. Movement keeps you responsive. Adaptability is often mistaken for indecision. In truth, it is clarity without ego. Water does not argue with terrain. It studies it, adjusts its path, moves forward. It does not mourn the route it didn't take. Humans suffer not because they change, but because they resist changing after reality already has. To move like water is to design life around exits. Not escape born of fear, but flexibility born of understanding. You do not rely on a single income stream. You do not trust a single system with your future. You do not assume stability where movement is required. Optionality is quiet strength. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It simply ensures you are never trapped. Detachment does not mean disengagement. It means participation without captivity. You can work within systems without worshiping them. You can use tools without becoming dependent on them. You can commit without surrendering awareness. Water touches everything but belongs to nothing. External freedom begins internally. If your sense of security depends entirely on permission, approval, or validation, no system will ever free you. You will recreate dependency wherever you go. Moving like water begins with refusing to outsource judgment. Observe incentives, question narratives, track flow, not to rebel, but to understand. Water is calm because it is patient. It does not rush to prove itself. It does not fight battles it cannot win. It does not waste energy on resistance. In a world addicted to urgency and outrage, calm becomes power. Those who move like water are not reactive. They respond deliberately. They wait when waiting matters. They move decisively when it doesn't. This is not a movement. Movements seek followers. Philosophies create individuals. This does not ask you to convert, align, or believe. It asks you to see, to notice where flow is restricted, to recognize when stability becomes stagnation, to choose access over accumulation, to value liquidity over illusion. No slogans, no banners, no enemies, just awareness. The most powerful people are not those who control systems, but those who can move when systems fail. They are not loud. They are not visible. They are not waiting for permission. They understand the world is not fixed. It is fluid. And so are they. Water does not resist reality. It conforms without surrendering momentum. It yields without losing direction. It adapts without losing essence. That is the law. Not written, not enforced, not debated, observed. Move like water. Not because it is revolutionary, but because it is inevitable. And in a world built on friction, flow is the only thing that, if you made it this far, take a moment, not to agree, not to adopt a belief, just to notice what changed while you were listening. The world doesn't slow down. Systems won't become kinder. Certainty won't suddenly return. But awareness travels with you. Flow is not something you chase. It's something you stop resisting. You don't need to fight every structure. You don't need to escape everything you're inside. You just need to know where you can move and when you must. That's not ideology. That's orientation. If this perspective was useful, return to it when conditions change. If it wasn't, let it pass. Water never argues, it adjusts. Thanks for listening, and as Bruce Lee once said, be water, my friend.